All right, everybody, this is lesson 99999 of the Zero to Hero Dataverse Quest. We have been through quite a bit, database design, form design, views, business rules, Dataverse for Microsoft Teams. And the last 2 weeks, we talked about more of the pro dev techniques. And when I advertise the lessons, I always say, you may not be a professional developer, but you want to follow the lessons because it's best to know what's available, even though you may not be the professional doing the work using those techniques, but it's important to know what's there in the platform. Today we have Danish Naglekar. Man, the guy is more than a hero in the industry, a friend of mine. Really appreciate him donating time. If you don't know Danish, he's responsible for a few tools within XRM Toolbox. He has a VS Code extension for developers within Power Platform. He runs the Power Platform newsletter, which I forgot the name. You say the name and you give us the website. But if you search his name or if you search his nickname, the Power Maverick, you find a lot of resources, training, even this book that I have at arm's reach. This is extending Microsoft Power Platform using PCF components. And the link is on the chat area here if you want to buy the book. It is an amazing book, very detailed with insights from Danish, from Scott Duro, from the PM for PCF components at Microsoft. So great book. And above all, great guy. Danish, thank you so much for taking the time and preparing the lesson for us. The floor is yours. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for that nice introduction, Victor. I would say I'm not like Victor exaggerated a lot of things. I'm not like a superhero or anyone. I'm still like on level. I'm still learning, right? So everyone is learning, and that's where we come here. And once we learn, we try to educate others. That's the plan, right? That's how the community grows. So, like, if you learn something new, then try to come into the community, try to explain that to others, and empower the knowledge. That's the goal. Yeah. So the topic here today is PCF. So let's see what PCF actually is. So where's my mouse? All right. So what is PCF and what does code components mean? So PCF is actually a framework built by Microsoft that empowers you to create the code components. Now, what are code components? Code components are the controls that you see here. These are all called code components. Now, framework enables you to create those code components, right? There are a lot of other things that framework does, but we would just be focusing on what that framework does in order for us to create those beautiful code components that can be added on model driven app, added on canvas apps, or even now portals as well, right? So you can, the code components itself utilize it, or the framework enables us to utilize the front end libraries like React or JavaScript or TypeScript. You can use Angular, you can use Vue, Swillet, whatever language you want, whatever frameworks you want, you can utilize those to create this beautiful looking front end. So now your model-driven apps or your Canvas apps or even your portals are not limited to what comes out of the box. You can enhance the look and feel for your customers, right? So that's the beauty of it. Because initially, when we had to do this back in the day, we used to do this through web resources. But web resources has, like, they never used to be part of uh, the UI, right? The model-driven app that you see today, it was not part of it. It was always disjointed. Whereas these components actually make you feel like it's, even though it's custom, it feels like it's out of the box, right? That's the beauty of it. So yeah, not taking much time here on this screen because we wanted to see the demo is as well, right? So we want to move ahead and then understand what is the difference between a code component created using PCF and a web resource, an HTML web resource. So there are a number of differences, but I'm highlighting some of the um, main differences here is the rendering. So when the code components render, they are rendered as part of the same context as the form, whereas the web resource are loaded after the form is loaded. So your loading time or your rendering time is reduced when you're using code components. Yeah. So that gives you the or your users a seamless experience when it's loading the form. So it's loading everything at once, right? Then the second thing is the number of files that are generated. So even though you're using multiple, like we would see this in the demo as well. But one of the things that we do is when we are building the PCF control, we use multiple files. We use TypeScript, we use HTML, CSS, we use a lot of these packages from different sources like NPM or even whatever other libraries you want to use. So this file structure, you can create a project out of it, but then ultimately it gets bundled into one single file that gets deployed in Dynamics. So your management is like in your source code, you would have nice segregation of your logic, of your UI, of your like MVC pattern or whatever you're gonna follow. You can follow those patterns, but then it all gets bundled into one single file. So managing it, deploying it becomes easier. So it's only one component inside of Dynamics. Now you can deploy it to any environments you want. You can provide that component file or solution file to anyone, and then they can use it and it becomes easier, right? But then let's say you're doing this with a web resource. Now, web resource by itself, like HTML by itself, is not, you cannot create complex things. You need JavaScript, you need CSS, right? So you need like few of the files. Now, to manage those files, you have to deploy those files separately in the instances. So you'll have to deploy HTML, you'll have to deploy JavaScript, you'll have to deploy CSS. So you have to also make sure that all of the versions of those files are also correctly deployed. Because let's say you deployed HTML, but then you forgot to deploy JS, and now there's a mismatch. So your rendering would all get screwed up. So you have to maintain the deployment of those different files when you are working with web resources as well. So that's the other difference. And then the last difference is reusability. So the way we design the code components is like you can use it anywhere on within that Dynamics, like within that Dataverse platform, or you can even give it to anyone else and it would still work exactly how you intended it to work. And that's why we came up with that PCF gallery, like because code components can be reused. And we have reused code components in our project on so many different levels. Like same code component is on account form, contact form, and on any other form you want, right? So that's the thing, it's reusable. Whereas when we are writing web resources, we tend to build the logic inside of the web resource, the HTML web resource, which makes it little harder for us to reuse them unless until you make really good efforts to make it very generic. But even if you're making it generic, you have to store the configuration file somewhere and then use those files. So it becomes very complicated when you're using HTML web resources. But code components, everything is out of the box, right? It's super easy. So how do you get started with PCF? So first thing that you want to do is you want to prepare your machine. And in order to prepare your machine, you have to install certain prerequisites. So the first prerequisite that you want to install is npm on Node.js. Okay, so to install that, you just go to nodejs.org and then you install the latest LTS version, and that should be it, right? First prerequisite. The second prerequisite is a .NET framework. So if you already have a Visual Studio installed on your machine, .NET framework is already installed. You just have to make sure that 4.6.2 framework is also available on your machine. If you don't have Visual Studio installed on your machine and you're using Visual Studio Code, only then you have to make sure that you're installing a .NET Framework 4.6.2 developer pack. And you can search that, and that would be like it's provided by Microsoft. So you should be able to pretty easily download it and install it on your machine. The third prerequisite is any integrated development environment. So it could either be Visual Studio, or it could be Visual Studio Code, or it could even be your Notepad++, or whatever you want, right? It's your preferred integrated development environment that you want to use. I prefer Visual Studio Code, and that is what you're going to see in today's demo as well. And the last is the Power Platform CLI. Now, this is the main core thing that we want to make sure that we have it on our machine. This is the CLI that gives you the framework and also additional things along with the framework. So it's the command line interface that gives you the framework. The uh, Power Apps component framework is available in the CLI. Along with that, few other things are also available, and you can search what are the additional features available with it. We might see some of those in today's demo as well. Yeah. Okay, so our development process. How do we get started with the development of a PCF? So first thing is we would be initializing a PCF project. This is like just creating a PCF project, like initializing what it needs in order to create a PCF project file. So if you're creating a Visual Studio solution, you have VS solution file, VS, what is it? SOL file, solution file, right? Whatever those extensions are. So PCF project has a .pcf proj as the extension. Okay, then following the journey, second is coding. You build your UI, you build your business logic, and then you construct your code. You do your like everything that you want to do in your code. So that's the second one. And moving on, following the journey, you build it. Okay, so now you have coded it, then you build it. The building is done through some CLI commands. Again, that's the Power Platform CLI commands that we would be using in order to build the component. Once your component is built, then you can, following the journey, you can do the testing of your code components using some PCF. So the CLI commands also gives you this nice PCF test harness. So PCF test harness is a way where you can do your sandbox testing. But whenever you're using test harness, there are some limitations to it as well, which we'll discuss when we come to that part. But yeah, but now once you build it, you can test your PCF code component, and then following the journey again, the last piece in the journey would be deploying the code components into your Dataverse environment. This needs to update. This is a very old slide, so this needs to get updated. But yeah, initialize your project and then deploy it into Dataverse. Now, the project file that we would create would have an extension called CDS proj file. You can use this. There are two ways. So one is to do a quick deploy, and the other one is to use create a Dataverse project and then deploy it using the Dataverse project. We would be seeing both of those ways as well. One we would see today, and the other one we would see in the next session. So that's the journey. Now I'm going to take a pause here and then see if anyone has any questions on the development process. So feel free to get off the mic and then ask questions. Okay, it's like there are no questions here. So moving on. So then next is there are some community tools. So what are those community tools? One is PCF Gallery. If you uh, if you have not been to PCF Gallery, then do check them out. There are more than 405. I even lost count of how many controls have been uploaded on PCF Gallery today. There are tons of them. It's maintained by Guido, and lot of those controls are fantastic. Like it's amazing the way community has built these controls, and these are the inspirations for you to incorporate in your when you're solutioning for a design for your customers. So if you're thinking about a solution for customers, you can always go to PCF Gallery, see if there is anything out there, and then take these inspirations or even use those controls within your project. The second tool is the one that I had up. Victor, yeah, you have a question?
So I was just gonna make a comment. I was looking at the gallery yesterday, looking for some components, and there is a friend of mine. We are doing a PCF class just like this, Danish, in Portuguese. And this guy, I think he has close to 12 or 15 components in the gallery as well. So, like you said, I mean, there is a lot here.
Yeah.
And I would say before you start doing yours, even if you want to do yours, it's great exercise, but look for some inspiration here because there is a lot of code available for you to get started.
Yeah, exactly. Even sometimes I try, like first I will try to see if there is any component on PCF Gallery before even starting the work. I've used it to do POCs. I've used it to even show it to the users how it would look like. And then once they agree, then they sometimes come up with some tweaks, and then we then get the code, see how it's been built, and then enhance the controls. But I saw there was a hand raised by Mala. Do you have a question, Mala?
So, what is the prerequisite to learn PCF controls?
Well, you should be familiar with JavaScript. That's the prerequisite. Now, most the
You mentioned that we are not going to use the web resource in while doing the PCF controls. Yeah.
correct. Yeah, we won't be using web resources, but you need to know some level of JavaScript, and but then everything will be based on TypeScript because PCF is built on top of TypeScript. But then TypeScript is similar to JavaScript. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, then
Yeah.
transition over to TypeScript will be pretty easy.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the second tool is PCF Builder. That's the tool that I had created when PCF was introduced to us. So the idea behind PCF Builder was to make sure that the developers are not spending time doing their CLI commands, writing their CLI commands, and then they can easily just go and click buttons and then do their work. So consolidating some of the commands into one single button click, those kind of things, auto incrementing the version. Also, the another thing that you can do inside of PCF Builder is actually go and look up any existing code component inside PCF Gallery and then download it to use it, and you can extend that same code that already has been built by someone else. And then I've also built a VS Code extension of PCF Builder that also enhances your experience within VS Code. So let's look at the demo. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I'm gonna show you. Oh, before we look at the demo, there are a few things that I want to showcase it to you. One thing that I want to talk about is the code component itself has a life cycle. I don't have a slide for it here, but then I wanted to showcase you how that life cycle of that code component actually works. So if you have any experience with ASP.NET, ASP.NET also follows some kind of life cycle, right? Any code follows some kind of life cycle. So because it's a new framework, that framework also have its own life cycle. Yeah. And the way the life cycle works is, well, I wanted to actually cover the life cycle later on. I misread my scripts. That's why I got lost. Sorry about that. So let me go and actually initiate a component here. Let's start with that first, yeah, and then we can discuss about the life cycle later on. So to start with PCF, building the PCF, first thing you have to do is go to XRM Toolbox, download PCF Builder. Okay. Once you open up your PCF Builder, you have to have an empty folder. So this is my empty folder. I'm going to copy the path. I'm going to here, and then I'm going to say new PCF control from blank, and then everything is new, right? So now here I come here and mention my namespace. So namespace is same as like your C# classes. So I can do 0 to 0. And then the control that we would be trying to build today is going to be the character counter. I'm going to say namespace 0 to hero dot character counter. Okay. I'm going to, my control details, display name would be character counter with a space. And then the control name automatically got populated for you, which will be character counter, but without a space. I can put in the description here, whatever I want to. Counts the of characters. Then we have to choose the template. Now there are two types of templates or two types of controls that you can build using PCF. One is called field and the other one is called dataset. Field is nothing but a control that will be binded to one single field. So for example, if you go back to the, let's say go back to this form. So this is a field. So if we are gonna change the look and feel for this field, then we have to use field type component. If we have to change something, let's say this grid, yeah. So if I want to change the way this grid should look like, then it becomes a dataset type of component. That's why we have two options. We have field and then we have dataset. Okay. Today's demo, we're going to look at how to do a field type component. So select the field type component. Then the second is, if do you want to install any additional packages? In today's demo, we are not going to install any additional packages. We're going to say none, and then we can hit the create button. Now what it does in the backend is it goes and runs the initialization command that is provided by the CLI. That initialization command you can see here is pack space PCF space init, INIT, and then it has a namespace provided as an attribute, and then name provided as an attribute, and a template. So these are all the details that it has provided. Right now, what happens in the backend? There are a few things that happens in the backend. Even though you have provided character count as the name, the display name, I'm going and changing the display name. I'm adding few other things. So I add a preview image, I add a CSS file, and then a localization file. So these are like community standards that we have defined, like this should always be there for you. So these comes in handy with that initialization as well, which are not part of the framework, which I've introduced as part of the tool to enhance the experience. So now the initialization is complete. What we can do is we can say open this in Visual Studio Code. Okay. So I've opened it in Visual Studio Code, and then I can see all this folder structure available for me. So let's just go and review this folder structure before we actually dive into the code. So there's this project file that we saw earlier. Yeah. Then there's this PCF config JSON file, which we don't need. The npm, it uses npm. That's why we have node modules installed. But the main thing that we want to worry about is going into the code itself, and the code will be in this character counter. Now, whatever name you have provided in your display name, that becomes your folder name. Yeah. Now you would see that the project name was demo. The reason why it was demo is because my parent folder where I had initialized this project was called as demo. So what it does is it takes the name of the folder here and then creates your PCF project with that same name. Then inside that PCF project, it creates a folder with this name. Okay, so that's why you have this demo because of this name, and then you have character counter because I named my control as character counter. We expand it, and then it has few more folders and files associated in it. The main file that we would see here is the control manifest file. So remember the namespace that we had provided was 0 to hero, right? So that appeared over here. The constructor is nothing but the name of your control, which is character counter. Then I think so I provided a dot here. Yeah, I gave a dot by mistake. So let's just go and fix it. Save. And then if you come here, reload, and then that changes here. Okay. Then the description that we provided appears over here. The control key, control type is always standard. It doesn't change. And then we have the preview image. Let me just make this a little bigger. What was the, forgot what was that command. I keep forgetting what the command is for zoom. Does anyone remember what the command is for zoom? Oh, zoom in. There you go. Okay. And then the preview image. Yeah. So the preview image was added in the image folder. So if you go to image folder, you can see a preview image here as well. Okay. Then there are a few more things. There's a property mentioned over here. So the property is nothing but this is where the nice things about PCF comes into play. So each PCF control, as I said, is reusable. The way it is reusable is because it accepts this properties, and these properties are nothing but configurable data that you want, right? So for example, if you go back to the form, if you want to change this name, this value, we would need it in our control, right? So this name is going to be something else. It's going to look something different. But then this value is what we would need in the code. And the way it gets that value is through this property. So property can be of two type, usage. So it can be of type bound, or it can be of type input. Okay, so two types of usage. Bound is where you can get the data from the form and then also set the data. So it's two-way. Input is just get the data. It doesn't set the data. It just gets the data from the form. So it's one way, right? So that's what this does. And then property name is what you can use within your control or in your code. Display name is what gets shown to the user. So this is where citizen developer and pro dev is like coming together, because citizen dev will say, okay, I want to do this. I want to build this control where I want to have make sure that I can set this properties, and then it would just display some nice UI. And then here you can then configure those properties. As a pro developer, you can come here, you can provide those display names here, but then you can provide some nice names that you can understand when you're doing the coding. You can also provide descriptions on your properties. And then there are different different types of data types available that you can bound to. So if I'm saying I can only bound to a single line text, which means this is my single line text. Yeah. If I have, let's say an integer, this is the integer, I cannot bound my single line text to an integer or even any status reason or any option set, right? Because there are different data types available. So single line text is one. Then there is single line email. Why is it taking time to load? Let me see. Let me try again. Ah, I don't know why it's not working. Whole, there's whole number. Then there is multi-line. Now I'm just using my control and space. The reason why I'm able to see all these data types, if I just hit control and space, these are all the data types. You can see it has a different what you call icon to it, right? Now the reason why I can see all of this is because I have installed PCF Builder VS Code extension, and that's how I'm able to see all of this. So single line has a lot of other stuff, but it's not showing it right now. So there's text, it has email and things like that. So what we're going to do is we are going to use single multi-line text. Yeah. And then we are going to do some, and if this becomes a little complicated, you can always go to XRM Toolbox. And within XRM Toolbox, you have this manage properties. So you go here, you can just click the sample property, change it, let's say character, display name, character count. I don't want to give any description here. And then here I can say what my data types are. These are all the data types available for you. Here you can say bound input. All of this is available over here, and you can say update, and that updates the property, and then you can see reflected over here too. Yeah. So that's done. Now, in order for us to use this character count in the code, we have to ensure that we are building the code before we can use it. That's why here it says close and build, because any change in the property, you always have to do a build before you can use it. Okay, so that was succeeded. We go to the code, which is this index.ts file. And within this index.ts file, you can see there's init. There are 4 functions: init, update view, get outputs, and destroy. So this is the life cycle, right? There's one method called as init, which gets invoked when your control is initialized. Then the update view is invoked whenever a property value is changed. So let's say going back to the form, let's say you change this value. So now this value, whenever it gets changed, the update view will get called, and then you will get the new value from the host. So this is the host model driven app. If you're embedding your PCF control on the model driven app, your model driven app becomes a host and your control is the receiver. Yeah. So if anything changes on the host, then that value is sent via the update view to the receiver, which means to your control. So that's what the update view is for. Then is the get outputs. The get outputs is the method. So let's say you change the value within your control, and then now you want to send that value back to model driven app or back to Canvas apps. The way you send that back is through get outputs. To invoke get outputs, you have to, they give you a method called notify output changed. So when you invoke this notify output changed, it would automatically invoke get outputs and then send the data back to model-driven app or Canvas apps. This get outputs only will work for two-way communication, which means whenever you have defined a property as bound, only then the get outputs is going to work. Okay. Then the last method is the destroy, which, as the name suggests, is going to clean up any necessary things. So once your control is getting offloaded, that's when the destroy method will be invoked first, and then it will be removed from the DOM. Okay. So this is how the life cycle works. So if you go back to the form, let's just go and check out how the life cycle works in real time. And this is a form where I have loaded the control. So as you can see, the init method got invoked. Now, whenever the init method gets invoked, the update view will always get invoked. Okay, because its properties are changing. But then the update view also gets invoked whenever anything changes. So in here, I'm changing one thing and then that changed and then called the update view. So whenever the control loads, this 1 and 2 will always get called. Then when you do an update, then 3 will get called, right? So third update is over here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on change output, which is again going to change the output and then send the data back. Okay, change the output means it's going to call this. So I'm going to change something within the control that is going to change the data and then send that data back using get outputs. So there you go, right? So now get outputs get invoked. Data that was sent was this. And then what it says is this is a changed host data, don't accept. And then whenever the get outputs get invoked, see the update view is also getting invoked again. So that's why you have to make sure that you're not ever going into that recursive cycle whenever you're building your PCF controls. Sometimes I've seen people make these mistakes and then their PCFs will go into like circular loop and they don't actually see it because it's not visible on the UI, but then the backend is still running through those cycles again and again, right? So always make sure that you are not going into these loops whenever you're building PCF controls. Now, what I wanted to show here was that I've put a rule which says if the value is this, then don't like throw an error, right? So this is the error that it is throwing. So what I wanted to show here is like you can also do error handling even if the data, like whenever you're sending a data and the data is not correct, you can still show an error on the model driven app or on Canvas apps. Like you can handle those errors as well is what I wanted to show here. So now let's change the output that can be accepted by the form. So you can see that now the value that I've sent was this is the changed host data except final. And you can see that it's reflected on this attribute as well. I've added this attribute twice on the form just to show you that it's getting reflected here. Okay. So now going back to our code, let's build a control. So to build a control, we would need, so it's going to be a very simple character counter. So we would need one text box and one label, right? So because we would need one text box, one label, and we don't have HTML, we have to define those components within our TypeScript file. Now, this is one way of doing it. We can also use React. We can also use Angular or any other TypeScript or JavaScript libraries that you are familiar with. You can use that. Those things we would see in the next session. Yeah. But for today, we are going to use very basic, very minimalistic code to create our component. So I'm going to create the variable. So private text box. And then text box is going to be of type HTML input element. Right? And then similarly, I'm going to have my label. But label is going to be of type HTML label element. Okay. So let me just close and reopen this again. Okay, there you go. It looks nice now. Okay, so I have my two elements. Now in the init method, I'm going to design my UI. So I'm going to just just initialize my text component first. So my text box is equal to document dot create element. And then my element type is going to be input. Okay, that's it. Right. Similarly, I'm going to do it for my label as well. But label is going to be of type label. Okay. So my component, my elements are ready, but I've not added my elements. So the init method gives us 4 parameters. One of the parameter is the div element, and this is where we have to attach our own elements into this div element. So this container needs these 2 elements added to it. So I'm going to say container dot append child, and then I'm going to say append text box, and similarly container dot append child, and then append my label as well. Okay, so I've appended these 2 things, and then what I want is I want to also leave a line in between text box and label. So I can do container dot append child, and I can do document dot create element, and then here I can do PR, like a break, line break. Yeah, so text box is on one line, break line, and then label is on the next line. So now I can add event listeners as well. So let's go and add a function, and I've created a function here already. Change function, which will go and count the length of characters inside a text box. Pretty simple. Now it won't be invoked unless until I add my event listener to my label, so to my text box. So on my text box, I'm going to say text box dot add event listener, and then add event listener will have some functions. So I'm going to use keyup function, and then it's going to be binded to my onChange function. And then the parameter is going to be this particular instance. Okay, so this is how you bind your event to an element. Okay, so all of this is done. Now if we run it, what we can see is the outputs will be shown, but we are not sending any data back. So the data will not be sent unless until we write something in the outputs. So let's go and write something in the outputs. Here we would see, if we press control space, we would get the property that's expected. And then we can say the text box value needs to be sent here. Okay, that's it, right? But this get outputs only gets invoked when we call the notify output changed, which is this method. But this method is only available in the init. Otherwise, you don't have any access to this. So what we can do is we can create another private global variable called notify output changed. Let's name it differently because I need to understand which one is local and which one is global. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to just copy the definition from here and paste it here. Yeah, so this definition is exactly the same, right? And then in this method, I can say notify output changed. Sorry, denotify output changed, which is my global. is equal to notify output change, which is my local. Okay, so this both becomes same, right? Now this notify output changed, I can use it here. Oops, should have copied it. Copy, paste it here, and then this becomes a working code. Okay. Any questions so far?
No, but I
Okay.
mean, when we do the code generation, I think the example that you use your tool, would that make sense to have those variables in place there? Maybe I'm just getting lazy, I guess. For any tool that's generating this code, wouldn't that make sense for the tool itself to generate this notify output change the local and global variables as well?
Yeah, yeah. So good point. But sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. So that's why I wanted to
I
have
see.
that flexibility for the developers to do whatever they want, right? We don't want to create an opinionated uh, tool or control in place. So
I
this
see.
is my way of doing it. It's not necessarily the only way of doing it, is what I'm saying. Yeah. You can even pass this as a parameter to the on change here, and then that would be available on the on change here. So you can do that way too, and then
Hmm.
call output changed. There are different other ways of doing this. That's why I didn't add it to the tool itself. Okay. Okay. So now once the code is ready, let's head back to the XRM toolbox again. And why did my XRM? Okay, there you go. So now in the XRM toolbox, you can use the build command here, or you could have used the build command inside of VS Code as well. I like to see the progress. That's why I wanted to use this. So click on build. Now it's doing the build. Now to build it used the command. Where did it go? Yeah, npm run build. That's the command that it used to run the build. Yeah, and then it's running the build. But it's already completed. Wow. I think so. They have speed up the project process. It initially used to take a while to build this. So once it's built, then as I said earlier, you can do this test in your sandbox environment. Like when I'm saying sandbox, it's not deployed to any environment, right? And then the way it does the sandbox testing is using its own PCF test harness. So this is how the PCF test harness looks like. So here you can say, well, okay, there you go. See, I was trying to find where my label went. So here is the label, and then you can start typing, and then you can see that it's counting the integer value. The other thing to note is the output is also getting reflected. So as I change this is a test or 0 to hero. And then you can see how this data output is getting changed. But not only that, it also changes the data input, because data input is nothing but your host. And because of that get outputs, it's sending the data to the host back. That's why this is also getting changed. Now, if I change it here, this change the input. It does not change the input. Why is that? The reason why it does not change the input is because in our code, going back to the code, we did not consider what's coming as an input. Okay, so let's go and fix that. So here we can say, okay, let's do context. So context is a PCF context. This is not form context that you might have used in your web resources. This is a PCF context. Now PCF context differs a little bit. It gives you all the functionality, but not entire functionality that is available. Most of the functionality is available, but not all of them is available that is provided by form context or execution context. Okay. So here you can see it provides you with client, device, factory formatting mode, all of this. The one that we would normally be using, like most of the time you would be using, is parameters and web API. So parameters is the one that gets you the data from your property. And then web API is, as you know, web API. But web API does not have an execute command. It only has create, update, delete, retrieve multiple. It doesn't have execute yet. So what we would be doing here is we would be getting the parameter. So if you say parameter, it would give you this character counter. This is the name of your property. Now, if you have multiple properties, you will see multiple lists over here. We only have one property, so it's going to give only that name of that property is character counter. Sorry, character count. And then character count itself, because it's a property, it's an object. It has a lot of these values available. It has attributes, so attribute metadata, error messages. Error is a boolean. Error message is the actual message that the host is providing to you. Formatted, so you can get the formatted values, raw, security, and type. Now, a lot of these things are also like security, for example, like let's say there's a field security applied on your field. You want to also handle the field security when you're doing your code components as well. Or let's say your field is disabled. You want to handle, like if it is disabled, you want to handle disable in your code. So those kind of things are available to you as well on that particular property. So in attributes, you'll have description, display name, format, is secured, max length, and then required as well. So if it is required, then you can make it required within your code, things like that. So you can do those validations. What we are interested today is the raw value. So whatever the raw value is, we would capture that value and then we'll show it on the text box. So text box dot value is raw value. I think it's text. Oh, because it's of type null, that's why. Okay, so exclamatory point gives you string or null. That's what it does. And value will only take in string. So we are making sure that if it is null, then it is not sending in the null value. That's what it does. Yeah. So that now we are setting the value that is provided to us from the host. So let's just save it. Go back here to our XRM toolbox, build it again. In the meantime, let's just close this because we don't want to use it. Go to the browser and then remove it from here as well. Okay. So now it's built. Let's do the test again. So it's building, it's doing the test. Okay, and there you go. So now this value is also available here. If I change this, the output gets changed and it's reflected here. Now, if my host changes, oh, yes. The other thing, what's happening in the code is we are only doing this on the init, which means init will be called only once. This code should have been in update view instead. So let's go and put it in the update view, save it, and there you go. Right. So now it shows from host. Now, the way I'm doing the running is actually using this test harness watching. So it's watching my files whenever the changes are happening. So that's why I didn't have to rebuild it again. So let's just do this again. So this is what our data is. Let's say 0 to hero. The output changes, the input changes from host, and then the input changes, and then this changes as well. Now, once this changes, the output changes. So that's how it flows in. Yeah. Any questions so far? Okay, if no questions, then the next thing that I want to show you is how to add it to a form. So I've already opened up a form. The new interface or the makers portal does not allow you to add a PCF control yet. So for that, you have to always go to the classic interface. The way you can go to classic is you click on these three dots, say switch to classic. It would open up that solution, go to the entity, go to the form, and then open up the form. And this is the form that you would see. So what we could do is we could change this description on the contact and then go to change properties. I wasn't expecting this. Let's see if loads, otherwise I'll refresh. Okay. I thought I'll load this form up so it will become easy, but seems like it doesn't want to honor my request. Let me see if I can reopen this form again.
It's depending on the time of the day, it takes forever to load.
Yeah,
It's for advanced find. I've had advanced find take like 5 minutes to load one time.
yeah. That's why I like the new interface. It's much smoother experience, but unfortunately you cannot configure PCF on those on that interface yet. Anyway, good that it's load. So now in these tabs you can see controls. You can go to that control and then say add a control. Okay. Within this control, you should be able to see the control that we created, but we haven't deployed it yet. So that reminded me I have to go and deploy the control first. So to deploy the control, I was testing it in the test harness, right? It's not available on my environment yet. I can use this quick deploy. So I'm going to use the quick deploy and then 0 to hero. That's a prefix. No profiles. Okay. There was supposed to be profile, but anyway, we can create a new profile. So this is another feature of that Power Platform CLI that I was talking about. It lets you create a profile by just providing an environment. So I can provide my environment here. And it would let me authenticate and then save my profile to my local machine. So it says authentication successful and it created a profile. If I go here and then do list profiles, I can see all the profiles here, right? Now, once I have the profile, I can do a quick deploy. And now it's doing the quick deploy. Yeah. Sorry about that. There was a knock on the door. Okay, so now it's doing the unpack. It's doing a lot of these things. It's trying to import the solution right now. So this should be done in like a few minutes. You can also track the status here, which is saying running. As soon as you say succeeded, yeah, it should be completed. So we'll take a few more seconds. Publishing, there you go. And now while it's doing that, I want to go back to this form and okay, just want to close it because once I it needs to refresh, right? So I closed it again. Once I reopen it, it should refresh automatically. But you can, in this processing steps, you can also see that the control is over here, listed over here. 0 to hero character counter dot character counter. And to publish. Yeah, let's see how far we can go with this. Okay, it's taking forever to publish. So let me just go and show you how we can actually add it to the form. So change properties. And then here you can only see the controls that are enabled for multi-line, because description is a multi-line text. So you can only see the controls that are enabled for the multi-line text only. So on that control tab, once it loads, it's taking forever. Wasn't expecting this. Sorry about that, guys. Something that is beyond my control. Okay, there you go. So controls, say add control, and then here, oh, there you go. I can see a character counter. Oh yeah. Add a control. Let's see if it lets me. Yeah, there's something wrong with this page. Let's try again. And nope. Yeah, there's something wrong with this page because it should show text control here. It's not showing the text control. But basically, you come here, add a control, you select a control, you add it. And once you add it, it will go through some configuration. And once you do the configuration, click on OK, and then you should be able to see the control on your page. And yeah, let me see one more. Let me give one more try before we log off. Yeah, this page doesn't look good. It won't let me add it. Yeah. Anyway, so going back to our presentation, I just wanted to touch base on a few more things. So next session, we are gonna go and do a hands-on. So you guys are gonna do things parallelly as I do. So I'll be doing a hands-on with you, right? So in order to make sure that you are doing things along with me, you have to make sure that you're ready. So make sure that you're installing Power Platform CLI and all the prerequisites that we talked about today. You're installing XRM Toolbox and PCF Builder. PCF Builder, if you can install it for XRM Toolbox and VS Code, that will be amazing. But then the necessary is XRM Toolbox and PCF Builder within XRM Toolbox. Then we need one Dataverse environment with a form where you can configure your code component. So make sure that you're keeping those things ready. And then the last thing is we need a Fiddler Classic installed on the machine so that we can see how we can debug the code as well. Okay. So that was it, guys. We don't have time for questions. We have already run out of time. But if you want to follow me on social media. And then you can also try to be a sponsor on my GitHub page.
Awesome. I'll stay for a little bit, Danish. I know that you gotta go. If folks have questions on the install, I can stay a little longer and just guide you through how to install the components once again. And we'll talk more. Remember, follow Danish. He's got a lot of resource. He has a donate option on his GitHub if you want to donate and assist him that way so we can see these amazing tools evolve over time. But yeah, Danish, we'll let you go. I'll stay here a little more if folks have questions. All right. Thank you, my friend.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. I'm going to